strength of a true warrior. I do not rely on strength alone, Garrosh. My power is all around you. You made me what I am. No. You chose your own destiny.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. I've decided with the upcoming return of a certain someone in patch 8.2, the Rise of Azshara, I felt it was time to ask a daunting question that has plagued me for over 5 years, since the Warlords of Draenor. Did Thrall really cheat in his Mak'gora with Garrosh? Well, today I'm going to do my best to figure that out. I'll do my best to also throw away any bias towards Thrall, who is one of my favorite characters in Warcraft. Before we reach a verdict on whether or not Thrall is a cheater, let's go ahead and get our facts straight on what exactly a Mak'gora is and what it entails. A Mak'gora is a duel of honor and is an orcish custom, whereby someone may challenge another person to individual combat. The ritualistic duel has been often used to obtain a position of leadership, such as a fight for the position of group leader, clan chieftain, or war chief of the Horde. Other races within the Horde have participated in Mak'goras as well. During the older days of the Horde, it was traditionally a more lethal duel that led to one of the participants to death, usually. However, when Thrall was made war chief, the duel became non-lethal, though the participants are allowed to forego this challenge. The rules of a Mak'gora seem to vary between each Mak'gora, since they are chosen and set by the participants themselves. Generally, there are thus no specific rules. The only consistent theme in all Mak'gora is that the pair must fight to the death or until submission. For those curious, magic, for example, has never been stated to be forbidden, and has in fact been used in multiple Mak'gora duels, and thus seems to be permitted. While in the Warcraft movie, this was stated to be cheating when Gul'dan was faced against Durotan. It should be noted the movie is not exactly canon, it is considered an alternate universe. Similarly, many Mak'gora duels have involved both fighters wearing body armor as well, but it can also be forbidden when explicitly said. Refusing a Mak'gora can mean dishonor, when used as a fight to the death. Being spared can be perceived as a grave insult for orcs, at least for the Thunderlords. When the chieftain of the Frostwolves, Garad, had been challenged by his own son Fenris, and won the Mak'gora, he chose to not kill Fenris, which to him was a great dishonor, and drove him to join the Thunderlords, and leave the Frostwolf clan. In one unnamed orcish clan, Hansgard and Fenzok, who were brothers, were expelled from their clan and left for dead when they refused to kill each other during their Mak'gora. Now that's brotherhood at its finest. Let's go over some of the more notable Mak'goras with established rules though. Most notably was the Mak'gora between Karen Bloodhoof and Garrosh Hellscream, just before the Cataclysm in the Shattering novel. They had foregone the Mak'gora that Thrall had established when Garrosh was believed to incite war with the Night Elves at a peaceful summit for the Druids. The rules that they established was as followed. One weapon was allowed. A blessing of this weapon by a shaman of their choosing was permitted. Both body armor and clothing were forbidden, only a loincloth was allowed. Each participant had to have at least one witness. The combat was to the death. Now, Karen had ultimately died to an unbeknownst to him, a poisoned gorehowl that Garrosh had wielded in their duel together, which had been blessed quote-unquote, by Magatha Grimtotem, which is a story on its own altogether. Now, the poison in itself would be counted as cheating and definitely didn't do Garrosh any solid honorable points, but nobody really called him out for it, as it was deception by Magatha. This next Mak'gora took place in the manga/comics of Bloodsworn, so it's a bit more out of reach given the past of a lot of retconning taken place within the manga and comics, especially with the characters like Medan. However, Blizzard has stated some events in the comics did take place, but also they happened rather differently too. Now, in the manga/comic, Ashra, a Blood Knight, had challenged Shagara, an orc, for command of the unit, believing that leadership of the Garad Kra should be chosen by martial skill rather than race. However, he was defeated and nearly killed in the ensuing duel. Shagara opted to not take the fight to the death. The rules that established prior to Mak'gora were as followed. 1 weapon was allowed, body armor was forbidden but not clothing, the combat was to the death. Most importantly, magic was permitted within the Mak'gora, as it wasn't outright forbidden in the rules that they had established. But once more, this was in the manga comics, so we can't fully trust it, but lots of the lore from the comics has been used in the game partially, so especially noted within Legion. Though in many other Mak'gora, rules are sometimes not even defined. In Thrall and Garrosh's first Mak'gora that took place right before the Scourge had invaded Orgrimmar, no rules were set and the two fought in full armor, and Thrall used the elements in their fight. No victor emerged due to the interruption of the Scourge's invasion throughout the city. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of Garrosh and Thrall's final Mak'gora within the alternate Nagrand. Now, much like their first Mak'gora, no rules were established to our knowledge, but let's just take in the rules of Cairn and Garrosh's Mak'gora to deduce what they may have established if they did off-screen. 1 weapon was allowed. Both Thrall and Garrosh are only wielding 1 weapon. Thrall is wielding the Doomhammer, and Garrosh is wielding Gorehowl. However, Thrall does use the elements once his hammer is knocked from his hand. Another important rule established by Cairn was once the weapon was knocked out of their opponent's hand, they could no longer grab it until the battle was finished, so both followed this rule. A blessing of this weapon by a shaman of their choosing was permitted. It appeared that neither had gotten their weapon blessed by any shaman, nor is this really required in every Mak'gora. It's just an available option. Both body armor and clothing were forbidden, only a loincloth was allowed. Now clearly in the cinematic, both were wearing their armor. Thrall was in his full Doomplate armor, except for his shoulders, and Garrosh, while not wearing his shoulders or chest, he was wearing his belt, leggings, boots, and his signature glove. Each participant had to have at least 1 witness. Now, while the cinematic doesn't do its job of showing the player, we were Thrall's witness, whether we were Alliance or Horde. And after the cinematic plays out, Khadgar, Agra, Durotan, Draka, Cordana, Yarel, and Dakan are present. Whether they witnessed the fight is uncertain, but we know that Agra, Durotan, and Yarel weren't far when the Mak'gora took place. Garrosh having his own witness is really unclear though, as there are plenty of Warsong in the village that could have seen their Iron Prophet in action. But Grom did seem pretty surprised over Garrosh's death after Blackhand had been dealt with. So, Thrall had at least a witness, and Garrosh having a witness is really unclear. The combat was to the death. Well, Garrosh was certainly killed by Thrall, so that pans out rather nicely. Before I say my verdict in regards to what I think, I asked other content creators what they think about this. So let's go ahead and hear what they had to say. But I think it's safe to say that Thrall and Garrosh's Mak'gora, well, their final one, was and is different than the one Cairn and Garrosh did within the Shattering. Anyways, on with their opinions.
Good morning, school. Just finished up the Game of Thrones episode and I saw your direct message about the question. I was wondering if you'd like to briefly state your thoughts on a video of mine. The question being, do you think Thrall cheated his Mak'gora with Garrosh or not? The topic of did Thrall cheat has been discussed quite a lot during stream time. And personally, I think the bigger question is, does it matter or not? When it comes to the Mak'gora, most Mak'goras have their own rules. alright? Like Thrall changed the rules of Mak'gora to no longer being to the death, and then we saw Cairn with Garrosh, in which there were a couple of rules, like the weapon being blessed, and once it's thrown away, you can no longer pick it up. But all in all, I would say that the rules of Mak'gora are not that set in stone, right? We don't see a referee showing up for the Mak'gora, we don't see any cards or penalties handed out, like, hey, you didn't punch that guy in the right way. That's not stuff that actually happens. A big reason why people say that Thrall cheated was because he used the shamanistic powers, but in that regard I would say that Garrosh knew exactly who he challenged, right? When before the duel starts he actually says, very well shaman, meet me at the Stones of Prophecy, and then they do the little duel. They have, I believe Thrall has witnesses in the form of us. I don't remember Garrosh appointed the witness. One of the rules that has been established in the past is that you can only wear loincloths. I don't believe that actually happened. So all in all, when it comes to the rules that we know, both sides have broken rules, and I honestly don't think that was the point of the fight. No in-game source that I remember has actually confronted Thrall about cheating. That's always been the player base that came up with that idea. And the point of the fight was not to see like who would go through the Mak'gora without breaking any non-established rules. The point was to have Thrall take care of the mistakes of the past, and this would then influence him so very much emotionally that the elements no longer properly responded to him. Like dealing with Garrosh did quite a lot for Thrall, and he's still dealing with that. So that's my opinion on did Thrall cheat or not. Hope this helps you out.
Well, the thing with the Mak'gora is that rules are usually agreed upon before the duel, as was the case with Cairn and Garrosh for example. There are general guidelines for the duel, but it's the contestants that agree on the specific ones, so we don't really know what Thrall and Garrosh agreed to. There are also no rules that forbid the use of magic, as far as we know, and we have seen Thrall use lightning bolts in the first Mak'gora during the Wrath of the Lich King. However, in my own opinion, I don't think Thrall should have used spells. First, because he also has a lot of experience as a warrior, so it sounded like he was at a massive disadvantage. I mean, he was a gladiator before he became a war chief. Also, in the lore, spells are way more powerful than anything the warriors can do, even though in-game it is different. So, in conclusion, I don't think Thrall cheated, but I don't think it was honorable to use the elements.
Hey Skull, thank you so much for having me on this video, man. I really appreciate it. Did Thrall cheat during his Mak'gora with Garrosh? Well, that's been a topic of debate since the cinematic was released. I do believe in the traditional sense of a Mak'gora, Thrall cheated. However, given the circumstances, he didn't have much choice. Garrosh at this time had committed some pretty heinous crimes, while not really showing much remorse outside of the Mak'gora cinematic. While I would have liked to see Garrosh have a redemption arc like his father, and a different route for his character, I was ultimately happy with how Blizzard handled this scene, and I think it had some great character development for both. I think one of the reasons this was so discussed when the cinematic was first released was because Blizzard released the Warcraft movie the same year. So a lot of players, ultimately thought Thrall cheated because of the scene with Durotan and Gul'dan during their Mak'gora. I do think, like I said, in the traditional sense of a Mak'gora, Thrall did cheat by using magic. However, I do think this is something that needed to happen, and I think at this point Garrosh's storyline was over, and I wouldn't have had it end any other way. Thanks again for having me on, man, and keep up the good Pandaren fight.
Did Thrall cheat? Oh boy. Okay, here's the thing. The traditional rules of Mak'gora are simple, right? No armor, each fighter has to have one witness, yada yada. Now I could look at their duel on Nigran and say, well, Thrall cheated. He's wearing armor and using shaman spell thingies. But that would be unfair. Because that isn't their first time dueling, right? Remember, when the Scourge attacked Orgrimmar during the Wrath of the Lich King pre-event, Thrall refused to send troops to Northrend, while Garrosh believed that sending troops was the only route to take. So he challenged Thrall to a Mak'gora. In this first duel, both of them had their full armor on display, and Thrall was using his shaman abilities such as Chain Lightning, and no one bat an eye. In fact, come to think of it, either Eitrig or Saurfang witnessed that first duel. So by that evidence, Thrall did not cheat. Sorry.
Okay, so you asked me if I think that Thrall had cheated on his Mak'gora with Garrosh or not. This doesn't seem like a super valid question, mostly because, at least from what I've read and what I've looked at, there's no set rules for Mak'gora. It's just, I mean, the way I see it, it's just like a ritualistic combat duel sort of thing that's made to resolve differences between, two individuals without having to go into like an all-out war. I mean, if anything, what Thrall did wrong was that he had that whole big battle in the Grand before having the Mak'gora, when he could have or should have just found a way to sneak in there and be like, what's up, surprise, let's Mak'gora and do this thing. But as for the actual combat itself, it doesn't matter. The way I see it, there's no rules. They can do or use whatever they want, unless there is some sort of prearranged agreement, which clearly it did not happen here. Boom.
Quick audio snippet for Skull Shorties. Do you think Thrall cheated with his duel with Garrosh or not? My answer to this: yes, of course Thrall cheated. He used his shaman powers when he was supposed to only use weapons. Remember in the Warcraft movie when they all shamed Gul'dan for using his fel powers during a Mak'gora? Thrall using his shaman powers is basically the same thing. Thrall cheated so hard that he lost his abilities to use his elemental powers.
Alright, mate. How's it going? What's your question? Do I think Thrall cheated in the Mak'gora against Garrosh? The short answer is, nah, not even slightly. The second rule of Mak'gora Club is there are no rules. I don't know if it's the movie that created this confusion, or if people just want any excuse to hate on Thrall, but if it's the magic thing, that's not forbidden. Participants set specific rules before the fight, so the only way Thrall would have technically cheated is if Garrosh had said, magic isn't allowed in this fight, and Thrall had been like, I accept those terms and conditions, and then he just went ahead and used magic anyway. But I don't remember seeing that happen. So that's my opinion. And also, I have herpes.
Hey dude, it's Necroxus. So, the Mak'gora. I feel like people don't seem to understand that a main description or a main qualification of the Mak'gora is that the rules are agreed upon between the two parties or somebody overseeing it. There are actually very few strict, specific rules that are required every single time. So much so that even when Thrall became War Chief, it became non-lethal, whereas before it was to the death. There really doesn't seem to be any set of rules that have to always be followed. The only rule seems to be that you have to fight until your opponent cannot fight anymore. Magic has never been forbidden. Magic has been used in multiple Mak'gora duels. The only other rule, I guess, is refusing a Mak'gora can make it seem like you're being dishonorable, but even then, it doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. There have been a bunch of Mak'goras, and I feel like people just say that magic is forbidden because the most famous ones involve people who didn't have magical abilities. Orgrim Doomhammer versus Blackhand, two warriors. Neither of them had magical powers. So people just assumed that the Mak'gora had nothing to do with magic, when it's just, no, most of these people just didn't have magical abilities to use in a Mak'gora. I mean, some Mak'gora, it's shown in when Cairn fights Garrosh in Cataclysm, or in the Shattering, that their agreed upon rules were that neither of them wore armor. However, there have been Mak'gora where people have worn armor. There have been Mak'gora where people have used magic. Thrall's first Mak'gora against Garrosh, at the onset of Wrath of the Lich King, Thrall was using magic. In the comic Bloodsworn, there is a Mak'gora between a Blood Elf and an Orc, and they're using magic. So there has been magic used in Mak'goras for quite a long time. The only place that it's been established that Mak'goras can't use magic is the movie canon. And in the movie canon and the game canon are not the same thing. I feel like we all would agree to that. It seems like they chose that in the movie canon just to drum up more drama when Gul'dan inevitably had to use it because he physically couldn't beat Durotan. There are some other Mak'goras where magic was used. Thrall's duel against Garrosh the second time, where everyone suddenly started saying that magic couldn't be used. Gunnar threatened a Mak'gora against Durotan. Obviously, that he backed down from that. But Fenris and his father had a Mak'gora in the alternate universe. Neither of them are magical, so presumably there was no magic used there. But, you know, there is no established rule set for Mak'gora, so it's, I don't know, it seems kind of like a misconception. I'm not sure why all of a sudden people started saying it after Garrosh was killed. Maybe because they just liked Garrosh and were upset he died. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's never been any official canon stating you can't use a Mak'gora. So hopefully that helps. See you.
I really do appreciate those that partook in my questionnaire. They will all get a proper shout out at the end of the video. What I found most interesting is a lot of the content creators here shared a lot of my same points and thoughts that I had either before or after I did my research. The consensus from the looks of it looks like Thrall is not a cheater, with 2 for cheating and 6 for not cheating.
That's incredible.
I went ahead and also asked on Twitter what they think, and the results are in. 49% of you voted that Thrall cheated, and 51% of you voted that Thrall didn't cheat. Holy moly, is that really close though. Now once again, the cheating aspect comes from the movie, which isn't canon if it's outright stated in their rules that magic, or the elements in this case, isn't allowed. But considering the history of Thrall and Garrosh, I don't think they outlined their rules, and in the past, Garrosh took on Thrall with the elements with no arguments. Although Garrosh, within the Siege of Orgrimmar, purposely weakened Thrall's connection to the elements to ensure his victory, although this also wasn't a Mak'gora. He didn't even, pardon the pun, look shocked that Thrall started to use the elements, which turned the tide in their fight when Garrosh was winning. Had Thrall not been allowed to wield the elements, he probably would have lost against Garrosh, as Garrosh was the better warrior. So did Thrall cheat in his Mak'gora with Garrosh? My answer is no, as universally the magic is allowed unless again, it's outright stated in their established rules, and I personally don't think either of them went to talk about how they were going to do this, as both were understandably not on the best of speaking terms. I personally believe Garrosh thought he could take on Thrall in a reality where he's not as familiar with the elements of this plane of existence. And he was dead wrong, which costed him his life. Some people also think after Thrall used the elements in his Mak'gora, that they themselves viewed the act as dishonorable and would revoke their connection with Thrall. But this is also not the case, as Thrall himself had his inner turmoil when he had killed Garrosh, resulting in his inability to wield the elements as he had prior, eventually leading to him giving the Doom Hammer to another. The elementals themselves really don't much care for the Mak'goras, and specifically in that timeline, the elements actually despise Garrosh for his actions, as you learn in the story Hellscream by Robert Brooks. The elements did have a bit of a problem with the orcs using them to kill the Draenor who were innocents, but again, Garrosh was not innocent and he already ticked off the elements, as I just said. But let me know what you all think. Do you think that Thrall cheated, or do you think he didn't? I'd very much like to hear what you all think. I want to thank Necroxus, Box, SoulSoBreezy, Noble87, Flying Buttress, Tailcraft Legacy, Doran Movies, and Hyromediax for participating. I do like hearing the many opinions, even if I might disagree with them, as at times my final opinion can be changed by others. So check them out in the description down below. Come and join us on the Discord, we would love to have you for more discussions. Maybe follow me on Twitter to hear me more often. Join me on Twitch to see me play the video games, though I am on break until Reforge is out. Or maybe support me on Patreon. A little help goes a long way, and I would greatly appreciate it. All of those are in the description down below, as well as some other things. But until next time, my friends, see ya!